So what do psychologists do? Psychology is such a broad field. If you leave this class with an interest in psychology, which you just might, many students do, and you decide to go into a career in psychology, you have so many options. It also means, though, that you really have to specialize. So if you have an undergraduate degree in psychology, you're not going to pick up a job in psychology in one of the fields that we are about to talk about. You're going to need a master's degree, and you're going to need to specialize. So I'm actually going to let you kind of look through some of these pages in your notebook, or rather this page in your notebook, kind of on your own. I'm going to pull out a couple examples, but a lot of these are careers that we talk about as the year goes on. So I'm not going to spend too much time on those. Educational psychologists study teaching and learning. So all of the learning strategies that we're going to learn about this year, those are products of educational psychologists who also then focus on how we can take those strategies and implement them in classrooms. Experimental psychologists, we're going to talk about a little bit more in our next unit. Psychometric psychologists, we will study about when we discuss things like intelligence and how we measure intelligence and do intelligence testing. And also when we talk about clinical psychology and we learn about the diagnosis of mental disorders. Most psychologists today are in a field that involves applied research, meaning they're not necessarily in a lab doing the research themselves, but they're taking the products of experimental research and applying it out in the real world. An example would be an industrial organizational psychologist. They work with companies to improve their workplaces. So they're going to go into a company and say, hey, this is how you can train your employees. This is how you can increase worker satisfaction, which should in turn boost worker morale, which should in turn boost productivity and make your company better. A really prominent organizational psychologist right now out of the University of Pennsylvania is Adam Grant. And when we're finished this lecture, you're going to be watching a little snippet of Adam Grant talking about his research in the workplace on what he calls givers and takers. School psychologists work in school settings. So we have a school psychologist in our building right now. They're involved mostly in assessment. So they will perform assessments or tests on students who might be in need of more support, perhaps an IEP or a 504 agreement. Students might be in need of like certain accommodations or modifications to the normal curriculum, and that would be the job of the school psychologist. Sports psychologists are really interesting. They're not just counselors to athletes. What sports psychologists do is largely focus on the relationship between what we're going to call performance and arousal. So arousal, think about a time when you had to get up and you had to perform in any kind of capacity. Your body gets amped up, right? Your heart races, your palms sweat, you can't think straight, your mind gets foggy. Well, what impact does that have? What impact did that have on your performance? What science tells us is that the more aroused we are, the worse we will perform on a given task. Similarly, with if you're under-aroused, if you're really, really tired, if you're really low-keyed, you're not going to perform as well. So something that sports psychologists do is work with athletes on how they can manage their thoughts in order to manage that physiological arousal, what their body experiences, so that they're able to perform really at their peak. And we'll finish it off talking about psychology really as being a helping profession. So we're talking about guiding people towards having just better lifestyles and improving their well-being, whether that's improving their relationships or overcoming mental disorders like anxiety or depression, or helping them, raise their kids. Counseling psychologists work with people in therapy who are undergoing some kind of challenges within their lives. I mean, I go to therapy. I talk to my psychologist about kind of how she can help me work through my anxiety and just improve my daily functioning. Clinical psychologists work more specifically with people who might have mental disorders or behavioral disorders. There's more emphasis in in clinical psychology with treating individuals that have mental illness. To make a distinction between psychologists and psychiatrists, both treat disorders. Both practice talk therapy, which we'll refer to as psychotherapy. Both use the manual that we're going to learn about this year called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or the DSM-5, in order to diagnose individuals based on their symptoms. However, only psychiatrists are medical doctors. Only psychiatrists are able to prescribe medication in order to treat disorders. It's actually the American Psychiatric Association that publishes the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM-5. The DSM-5, we're going to look at it this year, but it's essentially just a list of diagnostic criteria or symptoms that are used to diagnose people with mental disorders. But it's really important to note that only psychiatrists can actually prescribe medication. Psychologists are not able to prescribe medication. Dorothea Dix, you may have learned about in U.S. history when you were studying the 19th century. She really led the charge for reforming the way that we treat the mentally ill here in America. She looked at people who were confined to cages like animals in such inhumane circumstances and called for better treatment. Now, we are not still in 2020 in anywhere near the position that we need to be in treating people with mental illness. There's a great documentary that we'll look at some point this year called Bedlam, which focuses on how we still have a disproportionate number of individuals within our prison system who are diagnosed with mental illness. And they are not receiving the treatment that they need. But it was Dorothea Dix that first, in the 19th century, led that charge towards mental health reform that we still need to be striving for today.